see everybody. We're going to start off with a couple songs, and then Art will lead us in a prayer, and we'll disperse to our Bible classes. We'll sing, Lord, we come before thee now.
Lord, we come before thee now, at thy feet we humbly bow. Oh, do not our soul disdain. Shall we seek thee, Lord, in vain? Shall we seek thee, Lord, in vain? Lord, on thee our souls depend. In compassion now descend. Fill our hearts with thy rich grace. Tune our lips to sing thy praise. Tune our lips to sing thy praise. Grant that all may seek and find thee, the dawn supremely kind. Heal the sick, the captive free. Let us all rejoice in thee. Let us all rejoice in thee.
Before our prayer, we'll sing, The Joy of the Lord is my strength.
The joy of the Lord will be my strength. I will not falter, I will not faint. He is my shepherd, I am not afraid. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord will be my strength. He will uphold me all of my days. I am surrounded by mercy and grace. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord will be my strength. I will not waver, walking by faith. He will be strong to deliver me safe. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, the joy of the Lord is my strength.
Let us pray. Our most gracious Father in heaven, we're so thankful to thee for this day. We're so thankful for the seasons as they come and they go and show that you're in your power and your strength over everything. We're so thankful, Father, for the word that you gave us that we can study and learn more about how to please you better. We ask that you watch over all of us and keep us from the virus that's going around. Please help the people that are working on the serum to perfect it so that we can be done with this. We ask that you be with us always. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Jim killed my microphone.
It was almost dead and it was up there.
Fair enough. Sorry, this is probably easy. It's been a while since I've worn this guy. I'm in Psalm 101 tonight. I invite you guys to join me over there. Good bunch of Psalms this week, don't you think? I don't know if you guys have been a little dismayed by some of the Psalms recently. You know, you get into like the Psalm 80s and they're all just very, a lot of negativity. In fact, Psalm 88, I remember reading that one a couple weeks ago where this guy is just like, things are bad, I'm in a pit, all my friends are dying. You know, it's just like worse and worse and worse, and you get to the end and there's no resolution, and you're just like, wow, isn't that the world we live in right now? Just kind of a bunch of negatives. So the 100s have been, for me at least, a breath of fresh air. I feel like from Psalm 95 to where we are now this week, 100 through 104, just a lot of really positive themes, but also a lot of really good reminders. And so I want us to focus our attention tonight on Psalm 101. We'll read it together here in just a second in case you haven't had a chance to read that. But let me just start off by acknowledging some things that kind of put us all in the same boat. You know, each one of us faces our own unique challenges in life, right? You know, we some of us are parents, some of us are older, some of us have health problems. We have stresses from our jobs, stresses from our kids, stresses from even our own insecurities just about life. And, you know, some of this stuff that we face is self-inflicted, right? I think we would all agree with that, but some of it is because we allow negative thoughts to dwell in our minds. You know, that's why Paul makes admonitions like Philippians 4, where he says, whatever's good, honorable, lovely, of good repute, think on those things, right? Put those things into your mind. But I also want to remind us that a lot of the challenges that we face in life occur because we as believers have an enemy who is actively working against us. And we're actually going to talk about this in our Ephesians class on Sunday, either this Sunday or next Sunday, I'm not sure yet. But Ephesians 6 highlights, you know, the unseen nature of our struggles, how we don't wage war against the flesh. We wage war against things that are unseen. In fact, Satan is after those who are trying to do what is right. You read the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 12, it talks about how Satan's time is short, and so he's been cast down, and he's going about the earth with this tenacity and this ferocity. I don't know if that's the right word. He's furious, the Bible says, and he's looking for those who are holding to the testimony of Jesus. And I know this all sounds very epic and very sci-fi, but the Bible tells us that's the battle that we face is because Satan has a very short window of time where he can influence and impact, and he's doing the most with the time that he has to come after us. And so a lot of the stuff that we're fighting on a daily basis is because Satan is coming after us as we're trying to do what is right. And it's a daily battle against these things, and sometimes it feels like a losing proposition, doesn't it? Anybody been in that boat? I mean, I've expressed with some of y'all the challenges that I face. You know, sometimes I wake up and I just feel like I can't get it right. But as we talk about when we get together, we're not destined to lose. We're not destined to be overcome by Satan. And the beauty of the gospel is that I can do all things through Christ who gives me the strength. That means whatever situation I face, even if it seems desperate, I can overcome it. But where does that strength come from? And I ask that because you guys know, whenever you're in a situation where you feel like you're not able to overcome it, sometimes it feels very unnatural, and you wonder, where is this strength going to come from? How am I going to overcome this situation through the strength of Christ? In fact, there's times we feel burdened beyond what we can bear. You think about Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. You don't have to flip over here, but I'll just read this to you. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, as he's trying to write to encourage some of the brethren, he says here, we don't want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. Here is Paul, a man that we look at as just this spiritual giant, saying we were burdened beyond what we could bear. But listen to what he says next. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises us from the dead. And he goes on to use that as an admonition to say, God did deliver us, because that's who God is. But it took us getting to this point where we realized we were beyond help. And so I think we need to understand that our weaknesses focus our attention on resolution and help from God. And I think sometimes we set our sights too low. At least that's been my experience in all of this. And we try to manage it ourselves. And here's where I want to plug in to Psalm 101 this evening. Because just as the attacks from Satan come as daily assaults, our strength from God comes from a daily commitment to put our trust in God. And that's really what we see from David here in Psalm 101 as he is writing this psalm of praise. It's really a psalm of commitment that he's offering to God. And so this is what I want to talk about this evening. I want to talk about a daily commitment of trusting God. And so what does that look like? Let's read Psalm 101 and then we can talk about this. This psalm has been really helpful for me today, just in developing the right kind of mentality just about life, about who I am as a Christian and about the resolve that we ought to have. So here we go. Psalm 101. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. I will sing of steadfast love and justice. To you, O Lord, I will make music. I will ponder the way that is blameless. Oh, when will you come to me? I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. A perverse heart shall be far from me. I will know nothing of evil. Whoever slanders his neighbor secretly, I will destroy. Whoever has a haughty look and an arrogant heart, I will not endure. I will look with favor on the faithful in the land, that they may dwell with me. He who walks in the way that is blameless shall minister to me. No one who practices deceit shall dwell in my house. No one who utters lies shall continue before my eyes. Morning by morning I will destroy all the wicked in the land, cutting off all the evildoers from the city of the Lord. Now I want you to notice, just off the bat, how many times he says, I will. I mean, it's in nearly every verse here. He says, I will or I will not do some things. Did you guys notice that refrain? It's like every single thing that he talks about, he says, I will do this. It's not, I'm going to try to do this. It's a very resolute determination. I will. What does that tell you about David? If you hear somebody that says, I will do something, what does that tell you about that person? He is determined, isn't he? You can tell that he has made some decisions about what his life's going to look like, about what he's going to do. I think if I'm listening to David say this prayer, this is a man of gumption. He's decided that he's going to do something. He set his mind, he set his heart to behave a certain way. And I think the way he's talking demonstrates a very definitive objective with what he's going to do with his life. There's a difference between somebody that says, I will, and someone who doesn't. And I think it has a lot less to do with the words and a lot more to do with an attitude, doesn't it? I think Jim told me one time, we become what we tell ourselves. I mean, isn't that the truth? If we tell ourselves, I can't do this, he always gets on to me because I say, I don't like to read. And Jim's always like, if you keep saying you don't like to, you're not going to. But if you say, I do like to read and I will, it changes everything about how you behave and about how you go about your life. Let me ask you this, just based on what you know about David as a person. Let's back up and think about him for a second. Why do you think David makes these kinds of resolutions in a psalm like this? Think about his life. Okay, he was a king. Okay. Yeah, so as a king, I mean, he's having to make decisions like this and draw pretty clear lines in the sand. That's a good point.
I wrestled with this psalm a couple of years ago. And so in the Timeless Psalter project, we have to set every psalm and capture all the content. When you get into these implications, that's some pretty dark stuff.
Sure.
And part of my wrestling with it is, how do I moralize this? What am I supposed to do with it? I know you're going to get into that. And I would love to hear or I hope you're going to get into that, because it's when you're dealing with imprecations, there's a lot of the imprecations are really clear about attributing the enactment of justice on God.
Sure.
But this one doesn't get into that kind of language.
Sure.
How do you handle that? Or if you're going to get into that, say the answer for later.
I wasn't planning to, but I think, we ought to just destroy the wicked. I think that's what we ought to do. Those are certainly things to wrestle with. And if we have time at the end, maybe we'll come back and talk about that. But what else? Just given what you know about David. So he's a king, so he has to make these kinds of definite determinations in his life. What about his past history, though? Maybe some of his shortcomings. Why do you think it was important to him to make these sort of resolutions?
Well, it depends on when he wrote this.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, David's described as a man after God's own heart.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's the Bathsheba stuff, there's the stuff with the kids, and so I think it depends on when this was written.
Yeah, we don't know exactly when this psalm was written.
Everything with Bathsheba and the kids, David is repeatedly described as a man after God's own heart. And so I don't think that we can lose that. Frankly, I think that's what makes whatever David does and writes more applicable and impactful.
Sure. Yeah. I think knowing his struggles, though, this is what I wanted to bring out. It appears he's making a determination in his heart to avoid certain things that maybe he knows will tempt him. Because, I'm reading this, and I'm hearing some of the things that he did with, Bathsheba. Verse number 3, I will not set my eyes on anything worthless. You think about how that whole situation unfolded and started. A perverse heart I will know nothing of. I thought this was fitting. Verse number 2, I will walk with integrity within my house. That whole episode with Bathsheba started because he's walking in his house and his eyes just start wandering. And again, whether this...
You're talking about Bathsheba, not to cut you off, but
sure.
What are the opinions about when this was written? Because I also see this kind of to Tim or whoever, David is a king.
Sure.
Like, especially following up Saul. David could very easily have perceived Saul as just pursuing unrighteousness and sinfulness and destroying righteous people.
Sure.
And and with Uzzah and moving the the Ark of the Covenant. There's a lot of things that, especially as king, more than just king, he was a theocratic king. He is the authority to, enact God's justice in large part with the people and uphold righteousness.
Sure. And I agree with that point. I guess I'm bringing this out because we know more about David than many other characters, and we know that these are some things that he has struggled with. And whether this was written before or after this incident, I think it's pretty evident David is including these things because they were things that he saw as important resolutions that he needed to make. Whether or not he realized how pressing they were in his life or not, we don't know. But we do know that it impacted him when he didn't keep these resolutions.
I'm a freehand to Google, but I would suspect
Sure.
since it's in canonically it's later than Psalm 51. 51 was where David was mourning his sins.
Sure.
With Bathsheba.
Sure.
you know, it would make sense that that would color what he wrote here.
Yeah. Well, whether it's before or after, there's kind of a division in terms of what the what? Scholars, that's the word I was looking for. I'm certainly not one of them. There's a differing opinion there. But whether or not it's before or after, to me it's clear David had an awareness of weakness, and so he makes this resolution to acknowledge and address those things.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, whether or not it's before, or after, I still think the principles kind of
True.
hold true. You apply very general. We talk, we're looking here, I'll heed the blameless way. So he's meditating on the blameless way. He's following the blameless way. These things are a part of him. We look at, verse 3 said, "No worthless thing before my eyes." I don't think that it necessarily has to be, say, sin of Bathsheba,
Sure.
although that certainly was something that started with
Yep.
the eyes. But I also think that there's a lot of things we put before us that are quite worthless, whether or not it's sinful or not.
Yeah.
So I think that we might be able to take several different, approaches to analyzing that. What do we put before us? Are these things worthless? Are they sinful?
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to emphasize David's challenges because I think that's where I related to it, and maybe this isn't the direct application that everyone's making, but we all have areas of weakness that we're aware of, right? That the Bible tells us that we're not ignorant of the schemes of the devil. We know the things that cause us to sin. We know the places, the people we spend time around that cause us to struggle with certain things. And I think he acknowledges some of those things by saying, I'm not going to spend time with people that aren't any good for me. In fact, I'm going to put them away from me. I'm going to cut them off. I'm going to spend time with people. Verse number 6, the blameless are going to minister to me. His resolution is not simply about avoiding places physically, but to avoid the temptation that prompts him towards all those wicked things. And I think for us, as we're reading this just on the immediate surface, if we're going to walk by faith, I think it's so critical that we determine who we will be and how we're going to live our lives. That's the biggest thing that jumps off the page to me as I read this. And I think it's a great pattern because, he's not vague, he's not ambiguous about the resolutions he's making. He's not just saying, I'm going to live better this week or I'm going to resolve to walk with God. He makes some very specific, you mentioned, Michael, verse number 3, I'm not going to set anything worthless before my eyes. And we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. But it appears to me, as David is writing this psalm, as he's making these resolutions, he's specifically thinking through some of the situations he'll find himself in. You guys ever done that when you pray? Maybe you have something you're struggling with, or you're going into work, or you're going to meet somebody, or you're going into a situation that maybe you've wrestled with or you struggle with, and so you've just been saying, Lord, when I find myself here, help me to control myself or to not use ugly words or whatever the case might be. But you're thinking specifically about areas of your life. That's what I see David doing here. And I want you to notice some of the statements that he uses. Some of them are positive and some of them are negative. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I know yesterday when I read that, what kind of jumped out at me and what jumps out at me right now is he is very specific. How many times do we say a prayer where we generalize something, right? Like we just very, we know how the devil tempts us. We know our area of weaknesses, as you say. And how many times do we just in the day just generalize, hey, Lord, help me.
Help me.
Temptation pops up, please, help me. Well, okay, but when we read, David, he's getting very specific here, and I think that is very instructive for us.
Sure. I think it's to that point. That's why I wanted to talk about this one, because to me, he is resolving to walk with God specifically. In fact, that to me seems to be the whole purpose of this psalm. He says all these I will statements, but you notice in verse number 2, he says, when will you come to me? Because it seems to me everything that he's resolving to do is supposed to put him in this position where God can come to him and God will come to him. That seems to be his aim and his goal in everything. We'll talk more about that in just a second, but I want you to notice, as I said before Michael's comment, there's some positive, there's some negative things. He says, I will, but also he says, I will not. And I think that aligns with a lot of what we've talked about in Ephesians 4 and Ephesians 5, on Sundays. You've got to put off some things, I will not, and I put on some things, I will. I think that's the same pattern we see here. And so let me ask you this before we move on. How many of us do this? Make these kind of resolutions? And maybe you don't have to raise your hand, but I think to Michael's point, sometimes we're just kind of generic, aren't we? This is an area of discipline I think we all need to practice. And so let's just talk. What are some specific things maybe that you make resolutions about? Or what are some things we need to make resolutions about in our daily life like David is doing?
I really like, Job, Job made a covenant with God, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's one that applies to all of us.
True. I've made a covenant with my eyes that I will not look on a woman. Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's certainly applicable for men in a lot of ways as we relate to Job. I thought about, one of the things, as we're teaching Harper, for example, one of the things we're trying to teach her is to be kind. And so we help her say, I will be kind. And, that's a resolution I think that at its most basic level we all ought to learn. I will, as a Christian, behave a certain way when I'm interacting with other people. Maybe there's more specific things. I will read my Bible every day. I will not engage in useless discussions or gossip. I will be a good example to my family and my friends. We need to make these kinds of determinations at the beginning of the day. I think it's important. He wraps up this psalm by just talking about how morning by morning he's doing these things. Just a couple from the psalm that I think are important. He says, I will ponder the way that is blameless. As I read that, I was thinking, am I giving enough time to this consideration? Do I actually ponder the way that is blameless? I'm ingesting it, but am I pondering what God has said to me? And then the other one, I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. And I just thought about what that one looks like in my own life. When I'm with my family, or even when I'm by myself. Am I resolved to do what God says when nobody's watching? Or am I allowing myself to bend based on circumstances? I think that's part of what David is alluding to. I'm going to walk with integrity within my house, even if you're not looking, if it's just me and God. I'm going to behave a certain way. And so resolution is so important. But the fact that David gives specific points, specific things point to an important point. It's not just enough to be determined to walk with God. It's not enough for him just to say, I will. I think we need to define what that looks like in our life. And I think David defines that. He doesn't just say, I will walk in the way that's blameless. He gives these specifics because he has expectations for himself. So that's the second thing. First, he made a determination. And second, he gives himself expectations. I want you to notice that he's not just thinking through these resolutions. He's thinking about what they will produce. And I already mentioned this one. Verse number 2, I will ponder the way that is blameless. Oh, when will you come to me? So he's expecting that if he's doing this, that God is going to come with him. That's what I think this whole psalm is motivated by. But he also has these expectations for himself. Did you notice that? Verse number 2, he says, I will ponder the way that is blameless. He has these expectations that he's going to invest in thinking about good things. He's going to ponder it. He's not just going to read them. He's going to ponder it. Verse number 3, the one that Michael brought up, he's not going to put anything in front of him that's worthless. We live in a world where there's a lot of stuff that gets flashed in front of us, right? We get hundreds of thousands of impressions each day from things, whether it's from television, computers, phone, and so you can't always control what you see, but you can control what you put in front of you. We have a lot of control over what comes through these things, our devices, our smartwatches, our computers, whatever they are. And so he says for himself, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put worthless things in front of myself. And so he's defined an expectation for himself. And I was just thinking about, how often do we fail at keeping our resolution simply because we don't have a specific plan? We don't have a definite plan of action for what we are going to put off or what we're going to put on. We run the generic route. We just say, Lord, help me, or I'm going to do better today. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean I'm going to do better today? What does it mean, Lord, help me in my weakness? We need to be specific because far too often we fail because we don't have a plan. And so I the application is it's not enough just to set our direction. We need to see that end result. That's why people in January, so many Americans make resolutions. I'm going to lose weight this year. You know what always happens to those people? 70% of people are still sitting on the couch in March because they don't have a plan for when they're going to go to the gym and what they're going to do. And we do that in our spiritual life as well. Good intentions mean nothing without expectations. You guys agree with that? You guys see that here? You're making some funny faces at me tonight.
That is, I think 69 of those 70% got a plan.
Okay.
They just not determined to commit to it.
Well, and that's true.
And I think, you talked early on about I mentioned determination. I mean, that's what you were bringing out. I think that's the real issue. As far as the plan goes, I mean, you said this at the very beginning too, and I think it's real important. It's key is I made a decision. Like when you make a decision that you're going to be faithful, friends or spouse, the time to make that decision is not when you're being propositioned. That's not going to work.
That's true. Yeah.
You have to make that right now, so that when you are propositioned, the decision's already made. It has to be a determined decision. I mean, there is no discussion, there's no consideration.
That's the Joseph principle. He didn't make up his mind in that moment when she's yanking his clothes off. He had already determined in his heart to honor God. Yeah, you're exactly right. The having that resolution in your mind, I think, is so important. And I actually broke it out, and we'll talk about this more in just a minute. Resolution and determination is kind of two different things, because resolving to do something, and maybe this is a semantics argument, but resolving to do something is really, I've made this determination, or I've made this decision, but then I still have to make a determination in my heart that I'm going to follow through with it. And so we'll talk about that more in just a minute.
There's been a wish and a hope.
Yeah.
Expectation's not there.
That's right. Go ahead.
Yeah, to make him, continue. I think too, he's right. It's constantly, get the blameless way. In all the resolutions that he's making and these determinations, I also think that as far as application, we have to make these continuously. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes the reason why we fail at our goals is we set a goal and then we get all fired up about it, and then the next day we just forget about the goal, right? We don't have that continuous determination. I think about something I read a long time ago that stuck with me from C.S. Lewis. Was he talked about how do soldiers become soldiers? Well, they rehearse every day how to become a soldier, and when they first enter, they're not a soldier. They're just a civilian. They don't know anything. And when they rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, they eventually become soldiers by rehearsing. And in the context, you speak about behavior. How do we change our behavior? Well, we continuously make determinations that I'm a good person. I do X, and it's continuous and it's constant. I used to think that every time I stumbled at one of the many things that I struggled with, I was a failure. Well, but I made a determination to be better, even though I failed. Sure. I still make that determination, and I think that in part that's kind of what David, I would assume, would be meditating on, is making that continuous determination in these different aspects of his life.
Yeah. There's certainly a motivational element in everything that he's doing, that he's showing us how to get up and do it. But I want to remind us, at the end of the day, he's still relying on the strength and the power of God. This isn't just David willing his way into doing what's right. He's just determining, I'm going to walk the way that's blameless, and God's going to come to me, and He's going to give me the strength to do this. And so the motivation is certainly there. We need to see that. We need to see that ultimately this is pushing us in a very specific direction where God helps us walk this way as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the key in all this. He's addressing God with all of this. And it made me think that
that's a great point.
I've come to the place in my life on several occasions where I have said prayers like this to God, like I will. And there's probably nothing more terrifying in a way, because who better to hold you accountable than God? But who better to hold you accountable than God?
So I think that's what we have to remember, you know, with a lot of these resolutions and things just generically in our society, that we're not really involving God anyway, they're kind of secular. But when we're talking about resolutions of, you know, spiritual nature, I mean, God has to be involved, and I think we need to be in continual practice of saying, God, I'm committing this to you, instead of just, like, what I normally do is I just think of it as a one-way street. You know, God, can you do all this stuff for me? But in my best moments, I think more clearly and realize, you know, I have a part to commit as well. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, at the beginning of your comment, I was just thinking about Peter, just before Jesus was arrested, and he said, "I'll never fall away." You know, he made that commitment, but he didn't have the determination to follow through, or you know, circumstances changed, but by grace he came back. I just thought that was interesting to think about. At the end of the day, what I want us to realize, we do have to rely on God, but we have such a critical decision that we have to make about areas that we know we need to do better in. We have to identify, and we have to resolve, I don't want to be who I was before. I don't want to do what I was before. God has given me, you know, all these things that David talks about are things that God has revealed that he needs to do through his word. You know, how often does the wisdom writers talk about pondering the way that's blameless? That's something that God has revealed. You need to do that because God has revealed that. We understand that, but he only knows these resolutions because it's what God has revealed to him. And we need to remind ourselves that if God has revealed it to us, that's by his grace. And we need to determine by his grace to do it as best we can and to walk that way. And we won't always do it perfectly, but when we set our minds to do it, I think we become a lot more, I don't want to say in control, but at least aware of how much we need God in all of this. I just think about Galatians 5 and how it emphasizes that war that we face between the spirit and the flesh, and how at the end of the day it's only through the Spirit of God and through his help that we do overcome, but we still have to determine, I will walk in the Spirit and not walk in the flesh. And so, you know, just some things we need to think about as we're setting these expectations for ourselves. If I'm going to combat temptation, if I'm going to combat bad habits, I need to put specific actions to my resolution. You know, I will not waste my time with social media, with TV. I will not spend time with people who are not helping me walk with God. I will not vent my frustration when I'm angry. Instead, I will think before I speak. These are all things that we know God wants us to do. I will spend time with others who are a good influence. I will find time to use my time well. If we're going to follow through on our resolutions, we need to set these very clear expectations for ourselves, where we are going to go based on what God has revealed to us. You guys know this, but how we don't do it sometimes, do we? And we fail because we haven't clearly set expectations for ourselves. Any other thoughts, comments on that? I want you to notice just briefly one other expectation that he has. He does have some expectations for others around him. So he's got expectations from God. If I do this, God's going to come to me. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk a certain way. I'm going to stay away from some things. But he also has expectations from others. And I don't think it's necessarily about controlling them, but in this effort to identify, I guess, the kind of people he wants to be around, the actions he needs to take around those he doesn't need to be around. You know, he says, I'm going to put away certain types of people. In verse number 6, I'm going to look with favor on the faithful. And so his expectation is, if you're faithful, I want to be with you. And if you're not, you better watch out. I'm going to cut you off, whatever that means. Tim's going to tell us later. But I think having expectations for other people around you, it changes the dynamic. And I want to bring that up because, you know, some of the resolutions that he made, they probably offended some people. You know, when David said, I'm gonna cut off the wicked, I mean, somebody's going to be offended by that, right? But David didn't care because his resolution was to know God. And so I think having those kind of expectations for the people around you, it elevates those around you, but it also keeps those away from you that you don't need near you. I just wanted to mention that. Finally, since we're running short on time, the last thing I want to talk about is this element of determination. And like I said, this might be semantics, but y'all just track with me here for a second. I believe this is the most critical because I think we can do both of these things. I think we can resolve that we want to do this, and I think we can set expectations for ourselves, but at the end of the day, we have to be determined every day to do what is right. We have to wake up. I think that's why he says morning by morning at the end of this psalm. I love that he ends with that. Because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, Satan is looking for an opportunity constantly. I mean, he's not taking any days off, right? His time is short, and so he's looking for us. And that's why Paul would say, to the Ephesians, give no place to the devil. Be careful how you walk. Make the best use of your time. I must determine each day to put my trust in God and not give in because things can change quickly, can't they? I mean, you guys know, we are very fickle. You guys read my blog. We can be very fickle in the way we approach God. Y'all remember what we talked about last week with Israel? How God brought them out of Egypt with these mighty works, and then a couple chapters later, which amounts to maybe a couple of months, they're already complaining, saying, where are you at, God? Did you bring us out here to die? Their emotions change so quickly within just a matter of time, and I think we're that way sometimes. I thought about also the example of Elijah at Mount Carmel. You remember that? 1 Kings chapter 18. There's this magnificent showdown between Elijah and these hundreds of thousands of prophets of Baal. And God, in power, consumes his altar, right? Shows that he's with Elijah, even though Elijah stood by himself. But you know what happened in the very next chapter? Elijah runs off to the mountain. He says, God, just let me die. I'm all by myself. This is hard. He's discouraged after seeing all that. And I think that happens to us sometimes. Have you ever had a day where you felt like, anything is possible, and then you wake up the next day and just, I don't know, your heart, your mind just feels like, I can't do anything. You ever felt like that? Woken up like that? Our feelings are fickle, and they are heavily influenced by circumstances. And I think that's why we have to resolve and be determined to do it, to make a plan, and to find it in ourselves to stick it out. Because at the end of the day, we are people who trust in God to come through. Even when it's not immediate, we are people who trust in God. He is steadfast. He is faithful. That's what Psalm 100 says at the very end. The Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever. His faithfulness to all generations. And so, as we're packaging all this up, this is what I want us to take away. This lesson is more than just motivation to accomplish goals. There's certainly a lot of secular wisdom here, but we need to understand, as Christians, that it is imperative that we live with determination to do what's right. I mean, that's really why passages like Romans 6 exist, because we know what struggles we're going to face. And Paul says, should we continue in sin so that grace may abound? No, we're not going to let Satan win. I'm not going to give in to that. We have to resolve to do the right thing. We can't be people who make excuses. We just can't. We can't be people who put off doing what we know is right. We have to be people who see clearly what it is we need to do, who we need to trust, and determine in our hearts to unapologetically live a certain way.
I just wanted to add a comment earlier talking about why David wrote these Psalms. I wonder, because having that determination, I appreciate that short talk there, talking about that. Having that determination, because when we're faced with difficult situations, and like Paul said in 2 Corinthians earlier, staying determined sometimes is going to put us in a situation where we may die. What's our response? Our response is to cry out to God. That's what it should be.
Good point.
Instead of giving in. So what do? We should cry out to God. We should help, because that's what Paul did in 2 Corinthians 1. And I wonder if that's not why David wrote these, to help him.
As he's
stay
crying to God.
determined.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the three things I want you to take home with tonight. Daily commitment, determination is about determination. It's about expectation. It's about resolution, expectation, and determination.
What are those three?
R.E.D.
I'll send it to you in an email. Thank you guys for your comments this evening. Appreciate you guys. I kept waffling about which one we need to do.
You need to add an A and a Y in there and make that
Ready? I'm ready. I'm ready. It has to have 3 points, okay? You know how this goes. You gotta have 3 points.
It's like the thing that Chuck Norris works out with. So you can be like Chuck Norris. That's all you have to say. Right, you don't have to say no more. Now you stop me today, and that's all I don't have any room for anything else, but I don't have room more time. Okay.
I will determine non-worthless type.
You do none of us favors. Oh, yeah. Okay. It depends.
All right.
It really depends on who it is.
Is it like a bowflex type of thing?
I think it's something nice thing to do.
Just
Is that how it ended?
I can feel finish Chuck.
turn me around.
That's what I'm saying. You gotta make sure you tell that.
Just like 80.
I saw him working on his fence one time. He's got a ranch out in Minnesota. It's like,
I might have wrecked.
that might have been when I seen Chuck Norris work on his fence.
Oh yeah, totally. What is it?
All right, good to see everyone again. Just a minute, we'll be singing a song about rest, and it's a timely song for the middle of the week. I know that oftentimes I'm tired, and Wednesday is a good time to kind of reboot. Just wanted to share a couple verses. Matthew 11, starting in 28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Wednesday is a great time for reflection and for rebooting. And I know that this verse speaks to me a lot. And Jesus, the fact is, he invites those who are weary and tired to come to him. So this is our time to invite those who, if they have a need, if they need prayers in the congregation, we're here for each other and we're here for you. So if you have anything at all, come forward and let us know as we stand and sing.
Gracious Father, friend divine, consolation of the blessed, you have touched this day of mine with a foretaste of your rest. Though tomorrow can may come, trial arise
this evening we could open your word, we could study, reset our minds, remind each other what it's like to be a Christian. Just listen to your voice. We're thankful for your word. We're thankful for this church. We're thankful for all those who ventured out. And we're thankful for all those who are streaming and joined with us and staying connected every way they can. We pray that you be with all of our number, those shedding, those with chronic illness. We pray for the wayward, Father. Help us to be an encouragement to those who have fallen away and to those who've never known you. Help us to point people to Christ. We pray that you help us to finish this week strong in Jesus' name.
Like Tim said, I'm just really glad to see you guys. Glad for those of you who are able to watch. We love you guys. We miss you guys that aren't able to be here. But we're with you guys in spirit. Just glad to be able to spend this time together. We'll finish with In His Time.
In His time, in His time, He makes all things beautiful. In His time, Lord, please show me every day as You're teaching me Your way, and to do just what You say in Your time.